Margarita Cereijido. I'm the North American Chair of Co-op, and I am here in Vienna with Harriet Wolfe, the President of the International Psychoanalytic Association. We are here participating in the European Psychoanalytic Federation meetings, and it's great to be with Harriet in person after so much Zoom communication. Hello, Harriet.
Hello, Margarita. Thank you for arranging this.
So it's really a pleasure. And thank you for making time for this. You have a very tight agenda. And I would like to ask you a little bit about your being president of the International Psychoanalytic Association. The first question is, how did you decide to run for this?
At a certain moment, which was specifically in 2018, at the Warsaw meeting at the EPF. Here we are in Vienna, looking at the wonderful architecture out the window. That was in Warsaw in 2018. And it was a meeting that occurred shortly after a law was passed in Poland, making it illegal to speak about Poland's having had an involvement in the Holocaust. And this struck me, and certainly others, as a very problematic. For me, it was false fact becoming law. And at the time, from my point of view, politics in the United States were becoming unsettling. Many false facts were being just sort of made available to the public. And I sat in at the Warsaw meeting. There was a large group event that is actually done, as far as I know, at each EPF meeting by Shmuel Ehrlich and Mira Ehrlich-Ginor. And the topic of this large group on a Tavistock model was the impact of war in Europe. And in this large group of people, the exchanges went in the direction of the current state of affairs, which in 2018 was more elections of populist leaders, more sense of a media that was sort of engaged in a certain level of false facts, violence on the streets, which seems kind of funny now because there's so much more violence on the streets, than, at least in the United States, than there was in 2018. And what else? There were inhumane policies and procedures being used in many, many countries. And as the conversation continued in this large group atmosphere, I was very moved by a few things. For example, I remember a man from behind me who stood up and said, "I'm my 5-year-old self. I'm in Belgium and I am dodging bombs." It was very poignant. And there were others who were saying, "It's just terrible what's happening in the world. What can psychoanalysts do?" And my sense was that this room contained a huge amount of expertise, as does the IPA, of course. People prepared to think about, speak about, and hopefully intervene usefully in our troubled world. And that's when I thought the IPA could do this, so I guess I'll consider running for president. And yes, that really was an important thing. I had actually a wonderful introduction to the IPA while I was president of APSA, because I had travel covered to go to regional meetings in Latin America and Europe, also North America. And it exposed me to an international collective of psychoanalysts that was so interesting and also friendly. I think part of what I liked was the social part, but I also found in the EPF sort of models of scientific presentation that I found so great. For example, plenaries. In the EPF, there was discussion, there were questions and answers, there was an exchange that made it much more lively and took it from passive learning to active learning. So that sort of was my positive engagement with the EPF. Yes. And the sort of administrative side of things in terms of running for office was kind of late coming, but I thought it would be worthwhile to try to see what the IPA could do in our world.
I think my next question comes organically from that, which is your vision for the IPA, it's IPA for the world, not for the community and for the world. And I think it speaks to all this of what can psychoanalysis do for the community and for the world, for the troubled community and the troubled world.
That's right. Adriana and I sort of ran on that platform.
Mm-hmm.
We share that interest and vision. And I suppose, in a nutshell, what I'd like to accomplish is for the IPA to have an explicit commitment as part of its mission, an explicit commitment to social issues. In that reduced formulation, I find that many analysts worry that I want to change psychoanalysis. And really what I'd like to do is make it, share it, make it more available to the world, take it more out of the office and into public arenas where psychoanalysts can make a very big difference speaking psychoanalytically. So what I'm not talking about is a political involvement, although statements can be seen as political. When we're speaking psychoanalytically about attachment theory, about early trauma, about violence, about the impact of separation of children and families, we have a lot to say about the experience of people, immediate and sort of long-term, in response to such events.
Well, I think this resonates, what you're saying resonates very much with two important topics. One, I think in general psychoanalysis is more concerned right now with what can they do for the community. I mean, the idea that our work has to go beyond our patient on the couch, but what can we do for those who cannot have, I mean, not only at a social level, but also what can we do for those for people who cannot afford to come to our office, no? Like psychoanalysis in the community, like how can we reach a broader population? How can we help in neighborhoods, in public hospitals, with treatments who are informed by psychoanalysis, no? Or that have with therapists who have a psychoanalytic attitude, or who are listening to their patients in a particular way. And I think that's one current. But the other current also is, I think that there is much more awareness or interest in how the culture influences the psychic, no? And so how, whatever the political circumstances of a person, whatever the external social circumstances are, they're going to have a tremendous impact on the psychic, no? And that the patient we see in our office, it's going to be very affected by whatever happens outside. What type of regime they live under, what they can think and not think. For example, like you were saying, what happens if in your country they have a policy that you cannot acknowledge a historical event?
There's a tension within the profession, I think, about the importance of the culture. I think I agree that it's changed in the last how many years? Maybe 30, I don't know. It's relatively new that we're thinking, of course it wasn't new to Freud, but we're thinking about how the family culture and the local culture and the national culture and the state of the world are experienced by the child, by the family, by the school. So you said something about bringing psychoanalysis to people who can't afford it, and I'm not sure you meant to talk about doing psychoanalytic treatment. I mean, there's one thing to make psychoanalysis more affordable to people who'd like to have it, and that's something that is long in the tradition of psychoanalysis. You know, since the 1920s in Berlin and Vienna in particular, free clinics. Freud made a very famous speech in Budapest in 1918 saying that the common man deserves to have what he can get through surgery, he should also be able to get through for mental health. Teachers have recently, in this horrible condition that we're in with war right now in Europe, when children were coming with and without families to Poland and Germany, we've heard about teachers who are saying, I don't know what to do. These young children, they're talking to me, they're saying, we lived in a basement. We couldn't wash. We had hardly any food. It was really hard to sleep. And the teachers are, sort of aghast and don't know how to handle this. So helping the helpers is one of the things that we've been working on in the IPA in terms of trying to be of some help, specifically in the aftermath of the war. So that brings a psychoanalytic point of view or a sense of how to respond to somebody who's acutely traumatized, and how we respond differs in terms of the phase of the trauma. Right?
I meant it in the two ways. I meant both having low fees, so both doing psychoanalysis and charging little, that's one way. And the other thing is making the psychoanalytic method available, like you were saying, for teachers or for people who work with many patients or who work in other settings, who work in prisons, in schools, in hospitals, to teach them about the psychoanalytic method and to the idea of giving the patient a space to talk, to think, to a place where they can think about what's going on with them. Paradoxically, I think that people who are all the time dealing with very immediate needs benefit the most for having a space to think, to reflect. I'm saying this because one of the elitist ways of thinking was, that if you're worried about food or room and board, you cannot think about the unconscious. No, I think that for those, it's so wonderful to have a space where they can think about their thoughts as opposed to be worried by immediate things. No, so to give that people a space, it's very precious. So I mean it in both ways. Make psychoanalysis available. Yeah. I was thinking from a co-op perspective. I'm particularly interested in your being a woman president of IPA, and in 105 years we've had only two. So what is it like?
I guess I see it at this point in my career as an opportunity to encourage other women to pursue leadership positions and realize how interesting it is and how effective they can be. I think I got interested in this particularly, again, relatively recent past, I think in 2014 to 18, I was president-elect and president of APSA.
Yeah. Were you the first president of APSA?
Woman? No,
woman?
not at all. But I encountered what to me at the time was so surprising in terms of a sort of attitude that some people, mainly men but also women, would take towards me as a woman. It's not only why women avoid leadership positions, everybody does, insofar as a leader often becomes a sort of transference object, and decisions that are alarming to some get named by that person. So Trump did this, Biden did that, Bolini did that, Ungar did that, and it's so such a distortion. I gave a talk earlier today on a panel entitled "Is There an Ideal Psychoanalytic Organization?" which was very interesting and fun. But I think one of the things I thought about in that was there is no one that never leads alone. It's always a group that leads, and it's also what group follows. So leaders are chosen. They may or may not do what they were chosen to do, but there's a group. It's not just one person. I feel more committed to psychoanalysis and trying to create a sense of stability and integration in a fractious period in the world, where the IPA seems to me a microcosm of the world at times, that where factions within our own association sort of pull back into familiar groupings where it feels safer. And the analogy that comes to my mind is actually the pandemic, which was a global problem. And I think we would have managed it better here on Earth if we had had global conversations and global sharing of information and worked more collaboratively. And so I'm hoping that even with all of our differences, not even with and because of our differences, that the membership of the IPA can benefit from being an international organization that shares differences and different points of view. It may be that my being a woman is important because of what I became more interested in at APSA, actually, was not about female leadership. It was about feminine leadership, which I think of as not gender linked. I think of it, we know men who have an attitude that I think features probably most basically an ethical attitude of responsibility for the other. I got very interested in a book by Viviane Chitry-Vatine. She draws on La Planche and Emmanuel Levinas.
Yes.
And Emmanuel Levinas is a philosopher and a survivor of the Holocaust. Has very, for me, important conceptualizations of how people help one another in moments of urgency. He talks about the face, and he talks about another, let's say I or you, being captured by the urgent need of another. That face is also a metaphor for a person who comes to us in deep need. And our job is, I think, to be responsible for that person and not to act without thinking, not to act without a sense of respect.
And not being seductive.
And not be maybe it's more realizing you're being seductive. Because when you invite someone into treatment,
they need you so much.
They need you so much, and the experience is you're promising something.
Yes, I read that paper that you wrote. Yes,
well,
I read that paper. I heard your plenary session in 2018 at APSA. I thought was excellent, and then I read the paper that I thought was even better. About female leadership.
I titled it Female Leadership because at the time I had met enough women in the halls with colleagues who said, it's really wonderful to see a woman at the head of the table. This is so unusual. And I thought, well, why try it? You'll like it. Do it. But then I think it's not so much about being female.
Yes.
It's more about being feminine and being maybe not only responsible for the other, but being aware of the group.
Yes.
And its need to be cohesive if possible, and in order to be more constructive, generative,
yes,
and fun.
Can you tell us a little bit more about, because you talk about how important it is for an institution, the female or feminine leadership, the idea of holding the institution, and containing the institution.
Well, it is a really important function of the institution to provide structure, guidelines, if not rules, because especially in psychoanalytic organizations, we are populated by people like ourselves whose expertise is in the personal and in the unconscious, in all the ways in which we think about defensive functioning and object relationships and infantile fantasies. And the thing is, we run amok when we imagine that we can understand our colleagues analytically and begin to have dynamic formulations about someone's behavior in the boardroom or in the classroom. You know, we forget that it takes years in the consulting room to really learn much of importance about the unconscious motivations and structure of our patients. So we work in organizations that are kind of festering with the personal. And this can be very creative and wonderful, but it can also lead to chaos, instability. And I think this feminine desire to hold things together, in my hands anyway, seeks to develop ways in which dialogue can happen, conversation can happen, long enough to understand what the other is preoccupied with or worried about, and maybe you can find something that's workable between you.
So you still have 3 years ahead.
I do.
Yes.
It's surprising.
No, but
I can't tell you how quickly the last one seems to have gone. So
I think you're going to have the opportunity to do lots of things.
You know, Virginia and Sergio, Virginia Ungar and Sergio Nick, established this sort of division about the IPA, IPA in the community. And we just wanted, Adriana and I wish to just extend it a bit, build on it, IPA in the community and the world. And particularly Adriana is responsible for mounting a new committee called PACE, Psychoanalytic Assistance in Crises and Emergencies, PACE. But the other thing that we've done is within that part of the organization, there were 8 committees. They're all very active, either in specific settings like education and schools, medicine, hospitals, and then more the UN, and then more general things like violence, climate change, migration, immigration and refugees, and we had PACE. We could see, because they had started this, the previous administration, that those committees were doing work, but they weren't talking with each other. So they were operating in silos, more or less. So we established what we call a steering committee. And Mira Ehrlich-Gnor was willing to chair it and has done a great job. And she and the 8 chairs of these subcommittees now meet regularly, and they have found out a lot about what they have in common, how they can complement one another, and are beginning to have ideas about psychoanalytic interventions that will be effective, and the draw on, violence. There's a lot of violence and PACE and the humanitarian field. They all kind of overlap, and they're learning about how who can do what better and with what help from someone else. It's
fantastic.
They're doing a great job. It's so interesting. And we're starting a new committee the board has approved on prejudice and discrimination. We're working on a mandate for it, and it is a very emotional topic.
It is. Yes.
There is a sense, we've discovered that it means very different things in different localities. Certainly in the United States, racism has been a major topic. But it was when George Floyd was murdered that Virginia Ungar set up an intercommittee on prejudice and racism, I believe was the topic. And it was led by a North American. While the report tried to be international in its scope, it has been perceived as all about America and black-white. And we run into attitudes that have, I think, less to do with secondary process than primary. I mean, this is something that becomes very personal. So there's a wish to differentiate, but we have the opportunity, a little on the model of the steering committee, to see what the different passionate engagements are in these different sort of categories and what they have in common and how we can help each other understand what I see as really powerful or malignant othering. And
It's a
that's the
fascinating
general word. So we're working on this with Mira.
It's a fascinating topic. I think prejudice is something very ingrained and very difficult to talk about. And it's very important to create a space to think and talk about that.
I think that's what we're trying, but with an emphasis on not just thinking and talking, but action. The group relations program that the Steering Committee of Psychoanalysis in the Community and the World might begin would be for members who could explore in a group setting what happens to their thinking in the context of a group, in a diverse group. And it's revelatory that we have ways of thinking that we're not consciously aware of, but become observable to others and to ourselves in that kind of group setting, that Tavistock method. So that would be interim to the IPA, where some feel we have no prejudice whatsoever, and others feel actually we do and we could work on it.
Of course we have prejudice.
I think we do.
Yeah. I think you're doing an extraordinary job. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for being interested.
Very interested. Very interested. Is there anything else that you would like to say?
I'm really grateful co-op exists. And I just came from a panel on different sorts of pregnancy. And after the panel, we were talking about how this wouldn't have happened 30 years ago. The discussion that went on about surrogacy, adoption, conceptual thinking about the difference and the similarities between motherhood and being a woman. I remember a day when it was thought that you couldn't analyze a pregnant woman because she was too narcissistically preoccupied with her developing pregnancy. And now I hope we think that this can really help a pregnant woman. It'll help the child. It's going to help the world. And if she, that's really not true. So if we're coming further and I've downplayed our patriarchal culture, but I think I've become so accustomed to the opportunities we have as women now that I kind of think I've moved beyond it. I hope.
Well, thank you very, very much. Thank you for being here today in this interview, but thank you for the tremendous job you're doing for psychoanalysis and the global community. Thank you.
Thank you.